Hi, everybody. This is a weird setup. I'm used to having a podium. My name is Stephanie Parrish. I am the Associate Director of Education and Public Programs here at the museum. And I have the great pleasure of organizing programs like this that I always describe as trying to amplify the exhibitions that we organize. So when we announced Italian Style, gosh, over a year and a half ago, it was very clear early on that we wanted to create a thread of programming that was very much rooted in the Portland story, and to do a series of events and programs that really highlight the incredible legacy that our community has in terms of heritage brands like Pendleton, Nike, I guess maybe we could call a heritage brand at this point, kind of, sort of, maybe. And then also the incredible independent scene that is here, and tons of people are watching via channels like Project Runway and avenues like that. So when we decided to do this, it was very easy to call up Eden Dawn and Marjorie Skinner, who are two of Portland's great style watchers, Eden being at Portland Monthly and Marjorie at the Mercury, and to ask their advice and to basically ask, what could we do to kind of tell the story? And we came up with this idea of a two-part conversation series. So tonight is very much focused on the past and sort of what has brought us to this moment where Portland is, sort of on the rise, or has really already risen. So I'm going to turn it over to Eden and to Marjorie, and they are going to introduce our guests tonight. If anybody here tonight also bought a ticket for this program and they're not a museum member, just know that your ticket is good for admission to Italian Style anytime between now and the close of the exhibition, because tonight we'll probably be going till about 7:30, and you're going to want to luxuriate in that exhibition. So just bring your ticket back, show it to guest services, and they'll let you in. Okay, so without further ado, I will turn it over to Eden and Marjorie.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yes, thank you. I'm Marjorie Skinner, and as Stephanie mentioned briefly, I don't think people commonly associate Portland with fashion, or at least historically they haven't. But there's actually a really long legacy of this part of the world being an important part of the apparel industry. Going back to Oregon's earlier days when this region was really an important one for the fur trade, as well as Oregon becoming one of the major producers of wool. Portland, of course, has gone on to become a major hub for the athletic and outdoor industry. And more recently, we've started to pick up some notice for our independent fashion design scene, which is really what is going to make up the bulk of our focus this evening.
Yes, we're not going to go into a long history of the beaver tonight. I hope I'm not disappointing anyone. We could stay after and have those chats later, though, specifically with Marjorie. No, but I'll tell you a little bit about how we came to get our panel guests tonight. We put our heads together, and it actually wasn't that difficult for us to think about doing the jobs that we've done now, both for several years, working on fashion, of people who kind of shaped the scene as we see it. And so we'll go through and we'll have little moments for each of them, but just to give you the brief overview, tonight we're going to talk with Vivian Mcinerney here, who many of you might recognize as the former fashion editor for the Oregonian from 1979-ish.
79 at a different publication, but
So
long time.
Yes, has covered it for a long time, and I clearly remember being young and my mom cutting her articles out and putting them up.
That makes me feel so bad.
No, you should make you feel so good. It makes you feel so good because now I feel so cool to be sitting next to you. And we're also going to talk to Holly Stalder, who, along with her partner Kate Towers, founded Seaplane, which was a boutique in 2000 that really just changed the game as far as the independent fashion scene was here in Portland, and we'll talk about that a little later. And to my right, we have Nathaniel Christman and Rachel Turk, who have kind of run through the circles and will speak on the difference between designing for the independent movement, as they've had their own line, Church and State, for many years. And I'm proud to say I'm wearing my Church and State dress right now. And also, we're two of the three designers that did Pendleton's Portland collection. And now Nathaniel is at DN working for another heritage brand. So 6 people on the stage covering a lot of ground. And we're going to try and compact as much of that into the next hour as possible for you.
Yeah. So we'd like to start off with Vivian. And Vivian, we'd like to just have you talk a little bit about when you first started covering fashion in Portland and what that scene was like as you found it.
Oh, yeah. It was, I moved to Portland in 1979, and I'm sure if anybody here remembers that era, the thing that struck me is I walked down the streets and I thought, well, everyone really loves camping because it looked like everyone had just come back from camping. The big thing everybody wore were these orange Gore-Tex unisex raincoats. And so they did really look like they had just come from camping, and they wore a lot of boots. And of course, there was a lot of other stuff going on too. There was certainly an alternative scene going on, and semi-little punk scene, and a lot of vintage wear was big. But I was in my 20s, was very young, and I was trying to be a writer. I was taking writing classes, dreaming of being a writer, and which meant I was waiting tables, which is probably still true today for many writers. But I was asked, I met some people who ran a little alternative publication that no longer exists. It lasted for a very short time. But they asked if I would write a fashion story. And I have to admit, I was a little bit insulted. I was like, I'm a writer, I'm deep. You want me to write fashion? And so I was sort of taken aback by it, but I really wanted a byline. And so I had to figure out a way to write a story that felt authentic to what Portland was about, authentic to what I felt, and authentic to this sort of alternative publication. So I did a story on vintage wear. And I really enjoyed the whole process and meeting people and doing the whole, getting the models and the clothes and doing the whole shebang. And so after this publication, I ended up freelancing for a lot of different publications, many of which no longer exist. Oregon Magazine, Northwest Magazine, bunch. And including Willamette Week. And I wrote fashion for Willamette Week, and one of the pieces I wrote won an award, and so that got the attention of the Oregonian. And so I was actually hired by the Oregonian in '83, at the very end of '83. And so I went to my first Fashion Week in '84, and Fashion Week in New York. And that was before Lincoln Center, before the tents. It was just a free-for-all. There were fashion shows at hotel ballrooms and in the basements of clubs and just kind of everywhere. And there would be 500 fashion writers from all over at a fashion show, and then the show would end, and 500 people would run out to get a cab to the next show. And it was a mess, which is why they came up with the tents. But anyway, so I started writing for the Oregonian in '83 and wrote my last piece for the Oregonian in 2009. And so it was a big span there, although I did take 7 years off at some point and hung out with my daughters, who are now grown up. And I was really fortunate that I was hired back by the Oregonian 7 years later. So I've had two stints there, both of them great. And it was a time when regional press really did a lot of fashion, the Daily.
What was it like for you when you were going to some of those early shows in New York as a representative of Portland and of Oregon? What kind of reaction did you get? And did you see that start to evolve the longer you did it?
Yeah. The reaction I would get inevitably, and sort of they would delight in it, would be to say, oh, Oregon, is everyone wearing plaid shirts and work boots? I could say, yes. They are, still. No. But they did. They would say lumberjack. Is everyone a lumberjack there? And
is lumberjack an upgrade from camping, or think we should
It was
discuss
more
that.
historic.
Yes,
A little more
it's
historic.
true. A little bit more stately.
Yes. And I actually had, this is hard to believe, but I actually had one PR person whose job you would think would be to say nice things to me. But the PR person said to me, Oregon, where is that? And I said, oh, it's on the West Coast. And she said, I swear to God, I thought California was the West Coast. So we weren't well known, I will say that. But obviously that has changed tremendously. And one of the things, I would say the biggest change that I saw in my years of covering fashion is the rise of the indies. Always when I was covering fashion from the very beginning, there was always a small independent designer scene. And there were some people might remember Mary Adams, who did these funny, big frou-frou, multiple layers of crinoline dresses. And she sold at Mercantile and she sold in her showroom, but she couldn't really make a go of it, so she moved to New York and she's still designing. And there was a line I remember called like Jeanette, maybe Blizzard, which was sort of a Donna Karan type line. And there was a belt line. Is that you? There was a woman who did belts that like fabric belts, and she sold a lot. I think, but yes, that's exactly what it was. Green. Thank you for being my memory, because it's like going by. But I think the biggest difference was those designers. I think the goal was often to get into small manufacturing and to get into as many stores as they could. And many of them did. I think it was that Green in particular was in stores all over the country. So was that Blizzard. And they did fairly well. And they had little small manufacturing done often at like the Janssen, where Janssen was manufacturing. So, and then there was a shop that opened in, I think, 86. And it was called Nanu. And Nanu had, am I blabbing? Okay.
No, you can
so-
keep going.
So
They're here to listen to you.
So Nanu was a store that opened specifically to carry regional design. And when it opened, it was such a new concept. There had been like wearable art here and there, and there'd been people doing things here and there, but this was a woman who devoted a boutique to regional design. And I remember saying to her, well, you know, is everybody hoping to get manufactured and sold in many different stores? And she was like, nah, not really. And the idea was that people wanted these one-of-a-kind things as opposed to having it manufactured. And it was such a new idea that she lasted less than a year. And she did sell it to two Portland women who ran it for a couple more years. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there was this kind of rise of here's how I look at it, is when everything can be mass-produced and bought everywhere in the world, and you can travel halfway around the world and look in a store and it will be the exact same stuff you just left in your hometown, well, then the pendulum swings the other way. It's like that mass production, it's really appealing at first and everybody wants it and everyone's so excited because they have the Benetton store or whatever it is.
Right.
And then it swings the other way, and suddenly this culture was really interested in having individually crafted things, because having that personal touch is really what made it so exciting.
And I think it's interesting to think about when you were doing this in your heyday, this was pre-internet. And how much that has affected all of us here, particularly in the independent design community. Before we had access to the blogs, you know, when Vivian was going to Fashion Week, none of the rest of the world was allowed to see in those doors.
Or
Now
go on Etsy.
Or go on Etsy, or read the reviews. It was all industry only, and we waited for our dear ambassador to come back and tell us what was happening in the world.
And I lied, sorry.
My whole life's a sham. And as far as the independent design movement, it was the same thing, is people couldn't easily get their word out, which has made it so much easier. You know, now you speak to independent designers in Portland, and they'll tell me they have clients in London, and they have found their little footing throughout the whole world. But before that, there wasn't access. And it doesn't surprise me that stores like Nanu were struggling a little bit at the beginning, because it was either reading an article about it, or if you're one of the lucky ones to stumble into the store one day and say, hey, what are you guys doing here?
Yeah, it was that. I mean, watching that indie scene rise, as I said, the timing was just off for this woman. And then a few years later, we saw Seaplane come up, and I went to the first fashion show at Seaplane, and it just was such a delight and so unlike anything else I had seen, where it was this. I mean, I'm sure some of you remember when fashion shows used to be, it was like the ladies who lunch. Mm-hmm. It was done at, they were luncheons, which is a word that has sort of disappeared. Luncheons, and they were usually at the department stores. And it was really fun for a while, and then it kind of faded out, and there really wasn't an audience for that anymore. And so fashion shows were becoming these kind of awkward things that were just for selling clothes, and they were not hip. And then along came Seaplane, and they did this show that was so delightful and entertaining. And I remember specifically Holly did this really cute skirt that was made out of discarded snapshots, like garage sale snapshots. You know?
They were all from. Is my mic on?
Yes.
They were all from like art school. They were like discarded photographs that I collected from art school projects.
And she turned them into a skirt, and it was so cute. Anyway.
Well, and maybe Holly could jump in here too. But Vivian, I'm curious, because you saw the percolation of this indie stuff, and you saw these stores that are very much in the style of what Seaplane did. But the earlier stores didn't quite make it. Maybe they were a little bit before their time. Do you have any theories as to why Seaplane was able to catch hold and be as successful as it was?
Well, I'm sure it's because they were brilliant first.
Thank you.
But they are incredibly talented girls. You will. Everybody's a girl to me now because I've reached that age. But they were incredibly talented. But I do think there was something about being timing. It was actually my friend Mary Adams, this designer, once said, she said there's just no good about being ahead of the times, because she was always doing stuff a little ahead of the times, never made money. And there is something about timing. And I think, like I was saying, that cultural shift of people really looking for something beyond mass-produced work, just looking for that unique piece, I think timing has a lot to do with it.
I think there was a kind of a different energy in this city at that time. I was talking to the guy who runs Disjecta now, and I think ran it back then, and he was talking about the art scene at that time and just how there was just a buzz and an energy about the art scene during those years also. So I think it was just a very specific moment.
And I mean, that's what inspired me to start covering local fashion, because Seaplane shows were cultural events. It wasn't just people walking around with clothes. I mean, they had the hippest bands playing, and some of the hippest bands sitting in the front row, and it was a big thing to do on the social calendar for everybody who wasn't even necessarily a clothes horse. It was just where the cool kids were and where that creative energy was going. Maybe we should segue to talk about Seaplane even more.
I hope you're enjoying some of these pictures, by the way, that I've been flipping through of Vivian's work, like that timeless little number there.
Should I say anything about any of those or not?
If you would like to.
If there's anything we
yes.
should cover before we...
Okay, just one thing I missed that I'm sort of proud of was this was written, I did it like a short story. There's the pun, the short story. And it was about short skirts. And it was written like a little mystery or like a murder mystery or something. And the reason I'm proud of it is because Poynter Institute, which is a journalism institute, singled it out as good. That less proud of.
We'll just keep flipping.
This was a more recent one. Ultimate Northwest is was an Oregonian publication.
Perfect segue into us speaking with Holly now. As I
Hello.
said, Holly founded Seaplane with her partner Kate Towers in 2000, right? And now owns Haunt, which is a lovely women's wear shop and boutique at in the 811 East Burnside building. And next door also has a bridal shop called the Diamond Sea and makes beautiful gowns as well.
Thank you.
And now that I've bragged about you a little bit, tell us a little bit, since we're talking about Seaplane, what that was like trying to start a company or a business like that before, I don't even know, did you know that ones before you had come and failed?
No, we didn't actually. Kate and I, my business partner, she couldn't be here tonight. She's on vacation at spring break. I wore a dress of hers to represent. She made this dress probably 10 years ago, and I've worn it to lots of different events, but it's lovely, fraying, beautiful dress. We started Seaplane, we were working in a vintage store, and the vintage store went out of business. And the owner of the vintage store came to us and said, this is the last day I'm going to be in here, and I'm pretty much going to gift you everything in this space. He just kind of walked away and left us with this space, and he was like, you got to change the name because I'm in debt, and you don't want to continue on. It was, and so we really that night stayed up late and came up with the name Seaplane. We thought we were really inspired by kind of a modern airport aesthetic, and thought that everyone always wanted to know why we named it Seaplane, and it really was just a late night trying to figure out, what are we going to name this place? And so we started out, and it was a lot more like a gallery than a store because we didn't have any retail experience, and we wanted to focus on selling art and having local music and also fashion. And the fashion was really what just kind of took off. A couple weeks into business, people just started kind of coming out of the woodwork and bringing things in, and because we weren't really expecting, line sheets and established businesses, and we weren't even advertising out in the world that we wanted people, they just sort of heard about us and started bringing things in. Hey, will you sell this dress? Will you sell this skirt? The store was very minimal. You could walk in and there might be 100 pieces in the whole store, and everything was one of a kind. This is the same design that I'm wearing. This is one of Kate's dresses. And we this is a good picture. This is our dressing room. Our store was in an old butcher shop, and this was the old meat locker that we had painted, and it was a big dressing room, so we could goof around in there and take photos. I think that a lot of it was being in the right place at the right time, and the city really being ready for it.
And you guys both had more of a fine arts background than a fashion background.
We had both gone to school for art. I had gone to Humboldt State University in California, and Kate, I believe, went to the New England College of Art and Design. And so, neither one of us, I think, had any aspirations to be fashion. I mean, a little aspirations to be fashion designers, probably as children, but I went to school for photography, and that was what I was going to do, was be a photographer. And Kate is a very talented artist. She's a really incredible illustrator. I think we just probably passed one of her drawings a couple slides back.
So tell us a little bit then how, because it became this hub for many of the designers that are still working in town now. Church and State was selling there, and Liza Reitz, who's on the screen, was selling there, and Claire LaFay. We're getting all of these people who still now are really established in town, and it was kind of their start. I'm curious how you guys just found each other.
I think there was, I think it's important to note that Seaplane was a launch pad for a lot of designers, but there were also a lot of designers like Adam Arnold or Claire LeFay that were already established and were a part of the community, but I don't think we necessarily launched them. But I think that it was a really incredible resource. I like to think of it as a resource in a way, like for people who are starting out to be able to like try things out, you know, like to not have the expense of going to a showroom or doing a big expensive fashion show on their own. They could be a part of this community where they could have a line. Some people had these like fly-by-night lines and were gone in a couple months. You know, they tried it out and that didn't work and they were on to something new. And then other people still, you know, 15 years later have the same lines and are continuing on designing. So I think that was a neat aspect of it.
I think I technically found out about it at a guacamole contest is when I first heard about Seaplane.
I think we're going to need to hear more.
Yeah, we
No,
need to
you
hear
don't.
about this.
That's about it, actually. Some guy heard that I was going to school for fashion design, and he just had, I think, he might have known you guys, and he told me about it and was like, yeah, you can just bring stuff in there and sell your stuff. And so that was kind of the first little seed that was planted, letting me know that was happening. And then I think shortly after is when the fashion show you were talking about, the first Seaplane fashion show happened. And I don't think we were involved yet, but I think we went to it and
We were blown
that?
away. That was a show that we probably thought like 100 people were going to come to, and then I think it was like 1,000 people showed up. We had to do like a second show the same night. The venue, I think it's where Meow Meow was. Or
Yeah,
is
it's
that what it
Meow
was?
Meow,
yeah.
The venue is like, there's way too many people here. There's a really big line, and we didn't expect that many people, but there was so many designers in the actual show, and then each designer had like 10 looks, 10 different models. Their friends come, and it's like all of a sudden it turned into this really big event. So.
And you got a fair amount of national press as well.
We did. We were
and
lucky with
some
that.
celebrity fans. I don't know if you want to mention some of them. I know Sleater Kinney were big early Seaplane supporters.
Definitely some of the looks I felt really lend themselves to being on stage. They were, a little bit rock and roll and some raw edges and, not your everyday clothes that you'd wear to work or something you'd wear, a little more theatrical. So yeah, we did have, we were lucky to have exposure in that way, and we got written up in Elle magazine and an article in Vogue magazine, and that was definitely brought a lot of attention to us. I always and I was telling Vivian earlier, think that the local press that we got from U3 was probably what really kept our business going over the years, is just having a real local support. Elizabeth writing for the Willamette Week, and Vivian writing for the Oregonian, and you writing for the Mercury, and just getting that excitement in the air, hey, there's this fashion show going on, or a new designer in town, and kind of continuing that on. So thank you.
It definitely seemed to be this moment in time that kind of shifted culturally, where fashion before felt like the girly, the ladies who lunch, the little bit sort of maybe passé thing in some ways, to being the cool thing. It was as cool to be at a fashion show in town as it was to be at a concert or to be at a party. And I think that changed how everyone in town a little bit felt about the independent fashion scene.
Oops, am I talking out of turn? I think it was really interesting how that shifted. And I said in the beginning, I thought somehow fashion was beneath me when I started. I was quickly humbled and realized that was not true, that it's incredibly interesting. And that's why I stayed with it for 30 years. The artistry of it, interesting people on the whole who make it. So yes, it became a very interesting subject.
And it's really fun to go back and look at some of these photos as I look now. And then, of course, there was...
You have to mention, I don't know everybody
This is-
recognizes, but this is Courtney Love. She's quite famous.
Yes, this is Courtney Love, and I spent a week at her house, which was a different panel.
But how did she initially find you?
She found us. I think we had a write-up in Bust magazine, and you know, it was Kate and I in the photos, and we were modeling some kind of crazy dresses, and she called up and was like, you know, requested that I come down to her house and make her some tour clothes. And this is actually not my dress in the picture. This is a Claire LaFay dress. Claire ended up moving down to LA and doing a lot of work for celebrity clients after she left Portland. So, but yeah, it was always really exciting to get that exposure and know that something was going to be, you know, worn in a magazine or on the stage.
Yeah. And so one of the reasons we really wanted to have Nathaniel and Rachel here today is because they have the unique experience of both having their own independent brand, which is Church and State, but they also are 2/3 of the design team that worked with Pendleton to produce the Portland collection, which was like a younger skewing boutique priced line. Does that seem accurate enough?
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
And Nathaniel is now also working with Dian, who is another heritage brand that has tapped young designers in town to sort of reinvent themselves and keep themselves relevant in these changing times. So we kind of wanted to ask you to do a little bit of a compare-contrast and talk a little bit about how you navigate working with a brand that has this huge legacy, this huge reputation, and very much their own voice, and how you work around those parameters and put your own stamp on it, and what kind of limitations and freedoms you're given.
I think a lot of kind of what we learned to do later, we really kind of cut our teeth and learned while we were working with Seaplane. Like, we had a line before Church and State while we were still in school and in college, and we had our first fashion show. And this was kind of our first collection that we brought to Seaplane. And, you know, they didn't just take...
Pistol.
Yeah, Anther Pistol.
We found those
changed the
photos,
name.
and somehow that just mysteriously disappeared from the PowerPoint, but it was in there at some point.
And what was so great about Seaplane is just the aesthetic that Kate and Holly had. You know, not only are they great designers themselves, but really the store that they curated for Seaplane was what attracted us so much. And, you know, they were very picky about who they chose also. I remember a lot of people, you know, they didn't just let anybody in there. They had a very specific aesthetic. And, but kind of back to this first collection that we brought into Seaplane, I remember it was at the Belmont location. And after we kind of brought all the clothes in, if we'd be in the neighborhood, we would kind of like go up to the glass and kind of look and see what pieces were sold, because they were sold on consignment. And so it was always kind of excited, like, oh, that dress sold, or, you know, oh, that skirt sold. It was really exciting.
Yeah, and I think just being involved with Seaplane, well, Seaplane really, I think, because you could bring stuff in, make stuff and just bring it in and somebody would come and buy it, it gave you this sense that it was possible to have your own line and do your own thing. And I think just having that outlet really, on some level, led us to getting the Pendleton job, even because we were able to take the clothes that we put in Seaplane and develop collections and build a name for ourselves. And I think we got on the radar of Pendleton because of it. And so I think...
And how did they approach you? How did they set this up?
We were on a short list of designers that they interviewed several people, and then we were in the running with John Blasioli. He's here tonight, and Pendleton decided that because there was going to be so much work to do on the collection, because that first season we were doing the patterning, the sewing, the designing, everything, that it would be a good decision to kind of hire us as a trio, and that's how that started.
So tell us a little bit in that creation of the first collection with Pendleton, what was it like going from the independent design world, working for a 100-year-old company and figuring that out?
The very first season was, it was pretty intense from a workload standpoint, and not so far removed from the independent design world, because that first season we did just about everything from a development standpoint. We made the patterns, we sewed the prototypes, we hand sketched the designs, we did the technical sketches. And so we did a lot of the upfront legwork that you would do on your own independent line. So in that sense, it was similar.
And how much freedom were you given?
We actually had like a lot of freedom. I really respected that about Pendleton. They really let us, kind of do the designs that we thought were right. And I do think, we were talking about this today, that we did put natural limitations on the three of ourselves. Like that first season, we kind of like talked everything almost to death, like over-talked things. But I think the collection was better for that, because I think we were just like, originally I think we had an idea already what we thought would be a good fit for Pendleton, kind of classic American sportswear skewed towards a younger demographic in their fabrics, and that kind of made the path pretty clear for the collection.
Pendleton, we went through the archives, was I think the first thing that we did after we signed on, and it was pretty apparent that Pendleton had a established vocabulary that was already there, and so I think that was our parameter. So.
When you say archives, is there a big room where they have all the clothes from?
Yeah, down in the headquarters at the basement. It's actually
Just downtown on Broadway?
And you need like only a few people. You need like a fingerprint to get down there.
And you wear little white gloves.
White gloves.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you check anything out, it's they put it in the freezer before you bring it back, like for moths and everything. They're very, very careful.
It's pretty inspiring though, because they have racks of clothes, but then they also have blankets down there, and they have tons of old advertising materials. They have hand painted. A lot of their old advertisements were hand sketched or hand painted, and they had the originals down there. So it was.
This finally sounds like a reality show I want to watch, and that's just going to the Pendleton Archives and going through it.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Something that was, different from the independent scene to working for Pendleton, at least for us at that time, was the fabric development. Like we got to work with Pendleton, to design and develop these fabrics, which was new, I think, for all three of us. And that's so many designers' dreams, to be able to kind of get to design the fabric that you also use. And so we learned so many things through that, and that was an awesome, rewarding experience.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique thing, because just the cost and logistics of developing your own materials from an independent standpoint can be tough because of cost and minimums and just different sorts of things. And so it's a pretty great opportunity to be able to do that.
And we should probably clarify that even though this is like the past themed, Church and State is still around and doing capsule collections for Francis May, which is a really great boutique downtown. What sorts of things did you learn through the process of working with a larger company that you could bring to your own designs?
Good question.
Yeah. I mean, one of the great things about working for Pendleton was on the logistics side, after the designs have been made side of manufacturing, sales channels, that sort of stuff. Like we didn't have to wonder how, where, and when is this going to get produced. That was all, they had that all structured already. So that was a big benefit, and seeing that happen, I think, was you just naturally take away things from watching how that happens.
Yeah, logistics for sure. I mean, I think a lot of small brands, you kind of start out doing everything. You're shipping, you're packing the boxes, maybe you're calling for payment. And so, that was really great to, it was a great partnership, with Pendleton to kind of have this independent design with this heritage company and all of, kind of the resources they had in place.
And for those of you who might not have been familiar with the line, it exploded. I mean, it was internationally recognized and really helped. The thing that was so neat about it from my perspective, was that Pendleton very specifically branded this collection as the Portland Collection. And being called the Portland Collection then meant when it was showing up in like Elle Japan and in every blog, I felt like I saw every blog on the entire internet, essentially. Every single place possible, it was there, and saying, these independent designers from Portland, the Portland Collection, this is the new cool thing, over and over and over and over. And it just started being part of that narrative that is so strong right now of Portland being a place of makers and an independent time. Was it the same year that Portlandia came out? I'm not comparing it.
It was.
When we heard Portlandia was coming out, we're like, oh no, this is too much Portland.
It was like too much Portland.
The Portland overload.
Yes.
Yeah. But timing, kind of, Vivian, going back to what you were saying, like the timing, I think we really kind of hit it on the uptick with Pendleton, with kind of just the Native American fabrics were very much in trend right there. The lumberjack, it was like really hitting hard at that point.
Portland was peaking.
Yeah,
Heritage was peaking.
Yeah.
Native American prints were peaking. It was all kind of coming to a head. But we give Pendleton a lot of kudos for drawing from their own backyard of talent, and instead of going for somebody someplace else or a big name.
Which they easily could have.
Yeah.
Yes, we're very happy with them for that as well. And I think that kind of asks an interesting question then, if the time is become so ripe, is what we're going to talk about next.
You mean next week?
Yeah, I'm not cutting it off, but next week we'll be talking about the present and future of Portland, and now we keep saying, was peaking. Have we peaked? We'll leave that question for later, but let's move on a little bit and talk about the collection lasted for 2 seasons, correct? 3 seasons.
5 seasons, yeah. Fall 14, there was so it launched. It launched in fall 2011, and then we mostly did fall seasons of the wool component, and then what's up on the screen right now, that was the spring 14, so that was kind of the first spring for the Portland collection, and then fall 14 there were some accessories.
And that was the first time that you guys had done the accessories, correct? I'm kind of interested if that was a huge change, going from doing apparel to, they did bags, there was umbrellas, there was pillows.
Yeah, I think John had done some accessories before. I definitely had never done accessories. And also sweater knits, most of us were mostly experienced in woven. So there were definitely new categories that we were charged with designing, and those categories did great for us as well.
Yeah. Going back to what did we learn from Pendleton, one of the things that we learned is that how competitive it is out there in the fashion world. Like Pendleton, for all intents and purposes, was a pretty big success, but it's also, you see all the challenges that it takes to get something to that point, and how it still, even at that point, can be hard to make money at it, for it to sustain itself. So that was interesting.
And I mean, as we're about to talk about, these kinds of collaborations are far from being a thing of the past. Your relationship with Dean is still pretty new.
Yeah.
So
That's
maybe
about a
I
year and a half
don't know
old.
how familiar people are with Dean, but maybe you can give just like a brief.
Yeah, so Dean has been around since 1920. The line that I work on is actually called Dean 1920, and for being around that long, I feel like nobody knows about them. But they are traditionally have been a manufacturer of varsity jackets, varsity sweaters, and motorcycle club sweaters. So if you went to high school, or your parents went to high school in Portland, they likely had, if they had a varsity sweater, it was a Dean varsity sweater or varsity.
Yeah, well, they had to make varsity.
Well, yeah, I guess.
So if your parents were good at sports,
Yeah.
they might have had one.
So yeah, but actually the same year that the Portland collection launched in 2011, Dean also launched their first their own branded product. And after we stopped the Portland collection, around that same time, Dean, the guy who founded Dean, had left the company, and so there was a design position that needed to be fulfilled there. And so for about the last year and a half, I've been working on evolving their line.
And it's, I think not a lot of people know about it because they haven't branded it. You know, it is a new line. So it's like, you know, they've done cheerleading and varsity sweaters, but it really hasn't been its own brand that they've really done for themselves. So that's a new thing.
Yeah, they very much over the almost 100 years have been content with being a behind-the-scenes player, and if there was a Dean label in a product, it was only because there needed to be a label in the product. It wasn't as though they were selling it to stores or marketing it in that capacity.
Yeah, your boss was telling me earlier that you were the one that introduced them to the concept of putting a lookbook together.
Yeah, they had never really done that before, and so.
I like the learning curve for everyone. But I think it's an interesting thing to show that how the influence, how it goes both ways. How the independent design community has been having this influence on the big design community, and clearly there's something that the small designer can learn from the big guys. You know, I think that the Seaplane model with the one-offs and the consignment was great in that moment in time, but also would be difficult, I imagine, for many designers to sustain, never knowing if they're going to get orders or not. So it's kind of a different. It seems that Portland is moving a little bit away from that. Do you still carry many one-offs in the shop?
In the store that I have
in
currently?
Hunt now?
Yes, definitely. I definitely do. That's how I like to design. I try to put out some kind of ready-to-wear, easy pieces that people can buy, but I also, I mean, if I'm going to sit down and design something, I want to make something one of a kind. I do a lot of bridal because of that. I can spend a lot of extra time on one piece. But I think as far as like stores go in town, there's a lot of stores now that carry local designers, whereas 10 years ago there wasn't as many. I mean, I think there's probably 20 or so stores that are carrying local design, which I think is amazing. So I think there's a lot more, just a lot more socially accepted for someone to go out and buy something from like a small business or a small designer that they don't recognize. That the idea of something handmade is a little bit more accepted now than it was 10 years ago.
And it still seems to be something special to our city. I've just returned today from 4 days of shooting, doing a fashion shoot in Seattle with the magazines up there, to which they told me that there's a couple of local fashion designers in the whole city.
Oh, I could definitely address this. When I would go to New York for Fashion Week, often I would be sitting with other people like myself who were regional press people from like the Baltimore Sun and San Francisco Chronicle and papers similar to the Oregonian. And I remember talking to my colleagues about it, and sort of we'd sit in the rows waiting for fashion shows to start. And I was telling them about this whole design scene happening in Portland, the indie design scene. And I was like, yeah, do you have something like that in your city? And they're like, no, what are you talking about? And it was when I realized that there was just something incredibly special happening in Portland. But that's it. Portland's special.
It's our entrepreneurial spirit.
In going to sell the DN line recently, people would come up and be like, so where are you guys from again? And we'd be like, Portland. They'd be like, of course, you're from Portland.
You have to mention where you were selling it, because this is part of the Italian style programming.
Right. So in January, there's this, I think the biggest menswear trade show in the world. It's called PT Uomo. And they invited the trade show that we normally sell through Liberty Fairs to put together a 20 brand, born in the USA, made in America representation to show at this trade show. And so Liberty Fairs invited Dean to come and show our goods. And so
should specify that it takes place in Florence.
Yeah, Florence, Italy. So we said yes, and and I demanded that I come along. And we actually made this jacket that said "Ciao" on the back at the last second. And we were like, is this going to go over? How's this going to go over? And it went over perfecto, because everybody, even like there was the coolest of the cool there. And anytime they would walk by the jacket, they would put a big smile on their face. And people were trying it on and taking photos in it and Instagramming it, all that.
So we should all be wearing Chow jackets and going through the exhibit.
Come next fall. Well, they're not out yet.
Well, I would like to see if the audience has any questions. Before we did that, though, I did have one kind of question for people on the panel. I'm just kind of curious how much you think that the Made in America kind of resurgence movement has to do with our local fashion scene, especially designing here in the community and working for Pendleton and writing, if you feel like that was something that came up a lot.
I feel like Portland was kind of at the heart of the whole Beyond Made in America, the whole local
movement.
Yeah, and I think Made in America is partly tied into that. So that's a half answer, I guess.
Kind of part and parcel with what we've done with our local food industry.
Yeah.
And biking. A lot of it seems to start here. Coffee, biking, all that kind of stuff.
I've definitely seen a rise in the production houses in town over the last 5 years, with Portland Garment Factory and half a dozen other smaller companies that are sprouting up for smaller designers to be able to get and big and medium-sized designers to be able to get their stuff produced here in Portland, and that's really exciting because I didn't really see that 10 years ago.
Yeah, next week we are going to have the two women who founded Portland Garment Factory, Britt Howard and Rosemary Robinson, come, who will talk about that a little bit to tease it, because there is this huge step between being the small independent designer who's sewing every single thing in your studio, while you would also be filling orders and trying to work with, actually designing, which is a big part of being a designer, and then being a big company that has factories. And so what happens in that in-between movement, and some of the small manufacturers here in town are doing a lot to help our scene. Yeah, it's gonna be really good.
Yeah, same time, same place. Sort of, in the Witzel.
Same time, not same place. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. You asked so many good questions there.
Who wants to start?
I'm going to repeat it for those of you who didn't hear. She asked about if independent designers watch Project Runway with a heavy heart, or if they enjoy it, and then if independent designers want to be big, or if they want to stay independent. And I think that's an excellent question. Marjorie and I could speak to Project Runway, but we won't.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't watch reality TV, it's probably good for you. But Portland has actually taken home quite a few wins.
4.
What is it? It's 4. I think
More
we
cities
have,
than any other.
Yeah, we have more wins than any other city. So, like it or not, it has been something that has really drawn a lot of attention to our city for fashion. And Michelle Lesniak, who is the most recent winner from Portland, will also be joining us next week. So we will get into that a lot more. But I would really love to hear what these people have to say.
I've always watched it when there's been someone that I've known from Portland on the show, because that's a fascinating thing to see. Personally, I feel like the show, it stresses me out to watch it, and it's a little bit depressing. I feel like they don't treat the designers that well. But I mean, I think it's good exposure, and people keep coming back for more. So
Not for you.
Do you guys watch it? I would never go on the show. I don't think I could handle it.
I watched it, and I haven't watched it that much recently, so I've watched it and at points liked it and at points cringed. So I have a mixed relationship with it. When it first came out, I thought it was a really exciting idea, but it very quickly felt like there was so much product placement, and it didn't feel like a great representation in terms of how clothes actually get made, that it just started to feel like a reality show and less so about really unpacking fashion or clothes making for people, that it just, I lost a palate for it, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. When it first came out, we loved that show, and we watched, the first few seasons we were, because we were kind of just getting into that fashion that time, or, still fairly new, and so it's kind of like, what can you watch on this show and what kind of things can you learn, and that was very exciting. And I think the show's kind of moved on and it's become different things and it's become a very big deal. But I think there's some place in the middle between Michael Kors and stitching everything in yourself, and I personally kind of like an in-between version of that.
And I think maybe one of the reasons why Portland has been so successful on that show, and maybe it's like this in other places, but when we're making clothes in our studios, it's very, very much, you're cutting, you're sewing, you're very involved in the actual making of a garment, and so you've worked those muscles. You're nobody in Portland, or very few people in Portland, are sketching and handing a sketch off to a pattern maker, and then the pattern maker makes it and hands it to a seams person. It's like they're in every element of the making of that piece, and so I think it's there's a lot of people who are trained and ready for that environment.
I will say, from it having been on so many years, I think the answer, I'm going to speak on behalf of many designers, is the cringe factor comes from that the clothes are often made badly. Even if you're a great designer, because of the time they allow them. Even the greatest designer, you talk to the people who've been on the show, and it's like, you have no idea how many hot glue guns, safety pins, all of those things, because great art and great design does not come in 6 hours to make an Oscar gown. There's just only so much that can be done. So I think there is that little bit where you watch it and you're like, no, no, no. Anyone who's ever sewed is just offended. But a very interesting question, and I'm sure it will come up next week as well. And Michelle, who was just recently on Project Runway All-Stars and kind of went out with a flourish, I bet has even more opinions upon that.
And in terms of the Michael Kors versus the smaller side of the business, I think a lot of independent designers, quote unquote, don't necessarily want to make it to that point where you're a publicly owned company. I think a lot of independent designers want to actually stay smaller and just be able to make a living off what they're doing as a small business. I think you have to, in a lot of ways, you have to reach a certain scale to just be able to sustain yourself. So I think that's the exception, I would think. I guess it wouldn't be bad to be Michael Kors, but...
I think it also says something about a designer who chooses to make their career in a city like Portland. If they wanted to be a superstar, they would probably have to kind of throw themselves at the mercy of a more traditional fashion capital. So I think a lot of designers kind of come here with that mentality that they want to make their own career path and figure it out as they go along and direct it by what works for them and what they really want out of it.
I do think one interesting thing that comes out of it with that publicity, I remember talking to somebody whose name I've forgotten. He was one of the winners, but not from Portland, from Project Runway. And he said that he would Instagram a picture of a dress that he had designed, and when he Instagrammed it, it guaranteed 6 sales. And he was doing one-of-a-kind, very expensive, like $10,000 dresses. And I was sort of blown away by that. And little Instagram would guarantee him sales. So I guess it's good for that, publicity.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
I just moved back to Portland 2 years ago. I've been away for 20 years. I've lived here for 20 years. And listening to all of you tonight, I'm struck by the fact that in the last 2 years, I've been inundated with publicity in newspapers and magazines on the food scene, the pop-up restaurants, the food trucks, every small coffee roaster. But I don't think there's a Vivian out there anymore who's providing us with lists and information on a regular basis on where the seaplanes are.
Well, then we're doing a bad job.
You're reading the wrong newspapers because we do that every day.
Yeah.
Stumble on it rather than having regular opportunities and somebody providing me with information of where I might want to go and take a look.
I mean, I do think it's a good point. So, in the fact that Vivian writing for the Oregonian had the widest audience, for sure. The Oregonian's demographic was very far and wide. And, I writing for Portland Monthly, I'm at a monthly magazine. And, Marjorie does have the paper weekly, but perhaps might be a different demographic than the paper you're reading. So I think that there is only two of us kind of trying to do it in the whole city, and I would still agree with you that food coverage, it gets a lot more than what we can do. And part of that is because, though I firmly believe fashion is for everyone, not everyone reads fashion coverage, but everyone in this city eats and drinks a lot.
Well, and there's also a lot of institutional support for industries like food and drink, the craft brewing industry. I mean, those have flourished so much, not only because, it's a hub for creative makers, and it also has flourished because people have created metrics that they can show to politicians and people in decision-making positions, or, the tourism board, Travel Portland,
right.
that kind of thing, where they can show them these numbers that this is happening, it's producing this much revenue, and then these various entities get on board with it and can help to push it forward, and then it just sort of snowballs. And there's like a tiny bit of early work being done in that direction for fashion and apparel design, but we're many steps behind the food and drink industry in that regard. So I hope that it will similarly build momentum and become more widely talked about, but we're still waiting for that.
We're at step one tonight.
And can I say, I love you for that incredible compliment. Thank you very much. These two women are doing a remarkable job, and it's really worth looking beyond the daily paper. Daily paper is not really covering it, but these two women are amazing.
Oh, shucks. Yes.
So would I just go to a Pendleton shop to see the Portland collection and many, many pieces? Because I haven't been in Pendleton for a while.
Well, the Portland collection is no longer. Yes, but you can still find some pieces.
Yeah, you could look online, Google Pendleton, the Portland collection, and there's various pieces for sale, and definitely all the imagery is up to see that.
Is there anything jazzy happening now with them? Or?
You should check out their website.
They did,
Yeah.
they did also recently, like a year or so maybe, hire another designer who kind of came up on the independent scene here named Gretchen Jones, who also was
won Project Runway.
One of our Project Runway winners, and she actually stayed in New York after the show concluded and did her own line there for a couple of years before Pendleton hired her. And she's up there, but I don't know what her job title is. But
She's the director of women's wear.
Yeah, so pretty major, and they're the timeline on when things go from design to actually showing up in stores for Pendleton is fairly long. So I think we kind of have yet to see what her.
I believe the first collection you'll see from anything Gretchen has designed will be this Christmas.
Right. So
you will see, and it's just a bit of homeware from what I understand, housewares to begin with. So it's a little bit secretive still. We're not exactly sure what Pendleton is
nonetheless, I expect big things.
Yes. I mean, they have to keep going to follow up what happened before.
Yeah. Well, and she's a great contemporary designer, just in general.
Yes.
My question is, if an alien landed from outer
A single location?
When I Google Portland fashion designers, I do.
Oh, how would you find them? I'm still caught in the what you're doing with the alien. Like, are we hanging out? Are we going on the ship? What is it like? That's interesting. I mean, I think that there's a few things happening there. I think you absolutely can Google Portland fashion designers, and you're gonna find a lot. I think that that Marjorie and I are always trying to write about them and use them regularly. You know, she has a weekly column pushing them. There's fashion shows in town that are showing the designs. So we have
Portland Fashion Week. Portland Fashion Week would be a place where you could.
There's different.
That. I mean, part of when I mentioned that there were the beginning process of trying to create more of a unification for this industry. The City Club of Portland has recently taken an interest in Portland's fashion makers, and they've formed kind of like a steering committee. And I think this is the first public announcement of it, but it's called. What did they decide? It's Fashion Forward Portland. And there is a website, it does exist, but it kind of doesn't have, it's not ready yet, so don't look at it. But part of the goal is to have a comprehensive listing of like, these are, you know, pretty much all of the designers, and you know, have resources page if you are a designer, have shopping page for if you're looking to buy, where to find the designers. So we're working on it. Tell your aliens to come back next year.
Yeah, tell your aliens we need just a few more months. But I would also say that the local boutiques in town are so good about carrying local design. And truthfully, my job is to write and feature local designers in the fashion spreads and things that I do. So, I mean, I hope that that's an area that you find them. But part of the ways I find them, trying to find new and interesting people in town, is going to fashion shows and also just going to boutique owners like Holly, because they're carrying so many people here that are people from here, and also small designers from other states, which, though I want to support very much my Portland, I like the idea of even buying something from, you know, somebody who's trying to start a jewelry line out of Salt Lake City or whatever, because there isn't the infrastructure for them there. So I think really staying true to our local boutiques is a wonderful way to be able to find them in an easy clump.
Yeah, and there is like Made Here PDX is one store that's completely dedicated. It's not specific to just fashion, but if you had to have like one address to give to somebody, that
give
might
to that
be it.
alien,
and then you would kind of have to follow the breadcrumbs from there. But
You can find Dee in there, so go check it out.
Made Here PDX, it's kitty corner to pals, and everything in there is local. So that's a great one to go to.
I think what was great about Seaplane also was it wasn't necessarily fully comprehensive of all the designers, independent designers in Portland, but you could go there and find a nice chunk of designers there all at one spot. And so you could have taken the aliens there and gotten a pretty good idea.
That would have been amazing.
Can I say, too, there's this thing happening, again, it's in the future, so I don't know exactly when it will happen, but there is a group that's trying to turn the Lloyd Center into locally owned shops instead of going with the big anchors. I think they will maintain any anchor they can hold on to, but their idea is to actually make it a place where people would go for locally owned shops and clothes. And I interviewed Sam Adams, had this incredible interview with him. He was a mayor who really supported the regional fashion scene, and he had great plans. It was going to be such an exciting story. And the next day, the whole Beau Breedlove fiasco broke, and we could never run the story. But there is still this momentum going of trying to bring these things together to give them more power, to give the individual owners more power by putting them together.
I just love this alien analogy. It's gonna make it, I'm just gonna keep using it because I'm gonna be like, we need to do it so when the aliens come, we can send
Lloyd
them to
Center.
one convenient location. It's so simple. Does anybody else have alien related questions? No, just kidding.
I think it was you
Yeah, I think I've been watching that, and I think it's super smart for all these designers to do that. Because it's just so hard to have a business, and do you do wholesale, do you do custom sales, can you sell to big stores? And so what so many designers are doing in America by they're making it in America, which I was thinking earlier when you were kind of bringing that point up about Portland and if it's influence kind of made in America, but it's a way for these designers to kind of do like fast fashion, but that's handmade, and it's such a interesting approach. I think it's really, really smart, like the hack with design. She puts out, I think, like 2 or 3 designs a week, new designs, and she'll only make 25 pieces of each and then sells it solely online, and then, she'll sell out. So, she doesn't really have to worry about fabric minimums because she can, get a bolt of fabric and make all 25 pieces. She doesn't have to worry about store orders 6 months out because she's just going to make something that she likes and, sell it on the internet. And I think there's a lot of people doing that, and I think it seems like a really smart business model.
Well, I definitely think that I can't imagine. I think back about having a store 10 years ago when the internet, or 15 years ago when the internet really wasn't a big part of business, and how different that is now, because the internet is, posting on the internet is part of my daily job. I feel like I have, Facebook and Instagram, and I sell on my website and also sell through Etsy still worldwide. And that always really blows my mind that people will just order something like a wedding dress that's $1,000 or more online, and I'll ship it across the world. And so the internet keeps me in business for sure, definitely. So to answer your question there.
I'm not selling anything on the internet, but I agree with them.
Let's have him. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Perhaps a non-fashion question, because I'm not in fashion, but I did spend almost 40 years in the movie business working with what we call costume designers.
Mm-hmm.
And it always struck me how people like Ruth Morley, if you know that name, who designed Look for Annie Hall, right? How she dressed like a cleaning lady, and yet she designed all these wonderful clothes. So I thought it would be nice if you all could stand so we could see what you're doing.
I'm afraid that's not possible for me. I'm recovering from knee surgery, so.
Well, I will say I spend a lot of time as a stylist. I style shoots all of the time for video and commercial and editorial. I look like hell on shoots. I'm dressed nice today, though, so I'll stand up. And mainly because it's their dress.
I will say from a sitting position that I am wearing Adam Arnold, who is one of the designers that Holly mentioned earlier.
And I'll say this is now NAU, which is a Portland company, and my shoes were Portland. It was Cole Haan, when Nike had Cole Haan.
As I mentioned before, this is a dress by my business partner, Catherine Towers, or my old business partner. So I thought I'd represent by wearing an old Seaplane design.
I hope we meet your approval.
I know. Oh, thank you. Thank you. We got claps over it. This is what being a model feels like. I don't know if we can top that too much. Does anyone have anything else? I do feel like we already stood up and kind of took a bow, so it feels like a natural endpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that some of you will come back to talk a little bit more about maybe that pendulum continuing to swing towards independent fashion and what that's going to look like in the coming decades.
Yes, next week, again, our panel guest will be Michelle Lesniak, who, as we said, won Project Runway and has her own studio in Southeast and is making and producing some really beautiful clothing. We will have the 2 women who founded Portland Garment Factory, and we will also have one of the high-ups from Nike coming, which will be an interesting perspective to have all of us together talking about what design is doing right now and where we're going to look in the future when that alien comes. And I think it'll be a great conversation that we're kind of figuring out together because there's no definitive answers that we have. So I want to say thank you so much to all of our guests for coming tonight and
Thank
for you
you.
guys
Thank you.
being here.
Thanks for asking us.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.